quisiera saber cómo influyó su trabajo o su visita a la India para conseguir esa inspiración de la mezcla, o sea, del mix de técnicas manuales y digitales al momento de crear sus obras.
Yes, Mr. Glaser, we have a question for you. It's basically having to do with your trip to India and how that influenced upon your technique, your graphic technique. And if you could give us some feedback on that.
Would you restate that question and try to ask questions that can be answered, all right? Not generalizations that will get me involved in an attempt to answer a question that essentially will be useless to you if I answer it. So let's start again. What was that question?
Okay, well, yeah, we'll try to be more specific then. The question was, how did your trip to India influence your work?
I would say that a trip to India has no influence at all on my work.
Okay, very good.
However, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, as the case might be. I look at your beautiful, smiling faces. How attractive and wonderful they all seem to me. What a miracle it is that I can talk to you from across the world and actually speak to you directly. An absolute astonishing thing.
Okay.
Well, the pleasure's ours,
Excuse me, sir. My brother is also going to enter service, is also serving as interpreter. Can you now interpret what he said to our brothers and interpreters?
Bueno, sí, dijo que está muy complacido de ver sus caras tan atractivas y jóvenes y que está fascinado con el hecho de que puede hablar al otro lado del mundo con ustedes.
But in regard to that question, do you see the image that I see on my computer screen of this face?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
You do. That is the face of a teacher of mine named Rudy, who was an instructor in Kundalini Yoga, which is a manifestation of yoga that teaches about the serpent power that resides, at least metaphorically, at the base of the spine, coiled and as a source of energy. And Kundalini Yoga is involved in bringing that source of energy up the spine to the top of the head and spread throughout the body so that one becomes enlightened, whatever enlightenment means to you. It generally means that it renders you capable of understanding what is in front of you so that you can see what is in front of you instead of deflecting and being blind to what is in front of you.
Okay, Mr. Glaser, let me just give my brother a pause so my brother can interpret that, please.
No, that's a very good point, Mr. Glaser. Nos comenta el señor Glaser que si podemos ver la cara de la ilustración que tenemos aquí, es un profesor de él que se llama Rudy, un profesor de yoga, de Kundalini Yoga, que es un tipo de yoga que libera la fuerza energética desde la base de la espina dorsal y que sube con el objetivo de promover la iluminación de uno. Y Mr. Glaser nos dice que es muy importante esa iluminación porque nos facilita ver con mayor lucidez lo que está delante de nosotros y no poder percibir lo que está delante de nosotros.
But to answer the original question of what benefit a trip to India might have had, I would say it would have the same benefit of studying yoga or studying Buddhism, which is to be able to observe what is, which simply means to be capable of seeing what is in front of you.
Yes, please.
Entonces, en ese respecto, la práctica de la yoga Kundalini le ayudaba mucho para poder ver lo que está adelante y entender lo que es, entre comillas, lo que es.
Okay, and so to some extent, that has been one of my goals in life, which is to be attentive, to be able to observe what was in front of me, which is no easy task because it's much easier to ignore what is in front of you. And I would think the course of art and the function of art in society is to enable us to understand what we are looking at.
Entonces,
I remember that the first time I ever tried to draw my mother, which was at the age of 15 or 16, I put myself in a state of attention as I was looking at it. That kind of state you get into when you attempt to draw something, when you're truly attentive. And I realized, as I put myself in that state of mind, I had no idea what she looked like. That the person that was most familiar to me in my entire life had become invisible to me, which is true of most things that we are most familiar with. That we reach a point in life where what is familiar becomes invisible, and we no longer see what is most obvious. And the function of art, and most specifically the function of drawing, is to enable us to see, once again, what we have forgotten how to see.
Okay.
And so in this portrait, for instance, of Rudy, which is really schematic and done quickly and with a few strokes of black, you might ask yourself, how can a few strokes of black summarize the appearance of a person? But of course, that is the miracle of making art. You can recall what someone looked like.
Excuse me, Mr. Glaser, I'm going to be brief, but can we just pause for a second so we can just interpret that for the audience?
Surely.
Bueno, nos está contando la importancia de haber pasado por estas experiencias budistas que le ha liberado su capacidad de ver mejor lo que está ante él. Y nos dio el ejemplo de que a los 15 años por primera vez dibujó o intentó dibujar el retrato de su madre y estuvo en tal estado de atención enfocado que desconoció a su madre. Y entonces eso, como una anécdota, le pareció muy interesante, que uno entra en este estado de alta atención o alta conciencia y como muchas cosas que uno cree que está familiarizado con en la vida se vuelve invisible. Y ese
Well,
caso,
I'm sorry.
I was just going to use the example of Rudy. Y es el caso que tiene acá del trazado de su profesor, su maestro Rudy, que él suma en esos breves rasgos esa imagen.
This morning is a series of images that basically define what I've been doing in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, because my earlier work is relatively well known, that there are books of it and so on. And what I try to do in professional life is avoid specialization and avoid being known for a single way of working. The path of specialization, becoming known for a particular way of working and developing a style, for instance, is the path by which people become famous, by knowing something so well that you become the best at doing it. That is what professional life consists of. Unfortunately, while that is the way to become famous and to make the most money, it is not necessarily the best way to develop your full capacity. I learned the most from Picasso about this, in the sense that as soon as Picasso learned something, he gave it up. He moved on to something else. And as a consequence, he managed to develop most fully as an artist and as a person who was inquisitive and curious about the nature of seeing, and was able to be extraordinarily successful without being extraordinarily specialized. In our life, as professional artists, the tendency is to become highly specialized by doing a series of recurring tricks so that we become known as the best person to draw bulldogs or whatever that specialty is. That unfortunately may be the best way to become a professional, but it is surely not the best way to develop your capacity as being an artist or being an observer.
Right. Well, thank you. Let me give my brother an opportunity to translate.
Of course.
Nos estaba contando que él ha tratado siempre de evitar la especialización en su rama del arte y del diseño, porque ese, desde luego, es el camino más hábil para especializarse, porque uno se vuelve muy experto en esa línea, desarrollar un estilo, por ejemplo. Y claro, es muy lucrativo porque tú te vuelves el mejor en ese estilo y prácticamente eres el único también por haber desarrollado un estilo propio y personal. Pero dice que eso no es la mejor manera si uno quisiera desarrollar su potencialidad como una persona creativa, como un artista. Y usó el ejemplo de Picasso, que era una persona que una vez que ya dominaba alguna técnica o algún estilo, inmediatamente lo dejaba y se iba por otro lado. Y eso es lo que le hizo a Picasso lo que es, porque es una persona que se volvió un gran observador y tuvo una gran amplitud de inquietudes como persona creativa.
So what I'm going to show you now is a series of images where, in fact, one thing leads to another. It's very curious in your work. If you pursue it long enough and over a period of 20 or 30 years, you'll discover that things you thought you had newly invented that day turn out to have been done by you 20 years earlier without understanding that it had lodged somewhere in your brain and continued to persist as an idea until it occurred 20 years later. So I'm going to just show you the path of ideas as they change and manifest through your life, at least through my life, and how they change and how they influence you and how one thing leads to another. So let me just go through those quickly, and at the end you may have some questions. I'd be happy to respond to your questions. So this was Rudy, and then we move on.
Okay, well, let me just give my brother a pause just to translate that, please.
Nos va a enseñar unos trabajos de los últimos 5 a 6 años que normalmente no se ha visto porque mucho de su trabajo anterior ya está publicado, ya está en la web o lo que sea, entonces ya lo conocen. Este trabajo que es más reciente y que está en esta vena de one thing leads to another, de una cosa va a otra cosa o lleva a otra cosa. Y nos va a dar una secuencia de esto, las ideas que se han desarrollado en este intervalo. Okay.
Let's go on. This is a book jacket that I did 20 years later about Rudy with the very provocative title, Spiritual Cannibalism. Okay, you want to translate that?
Sí, este es nuevamente Rudy, es un maestro de Kundalini Yoga, unos 20 años después, y tiene este título provocativo que quiere decir canibalismo espiritual.
And this is the identity or logo for a museum on 17th Street in Manhattan called the Rubin Museum, which is a museum of Buddhist art.
Este es el logo del Museo de Rubin de arte en la calle 17 en Manhattan, que es un museo de arte budista. El logo.
And this is the facade of the museum where the logo has been translated into 3 dimensions.
Es la fachada del museo donde el logo se ha convertido en tridimensión.
And this is a Tibetan drawing of clouds that I used as the basis for a sculpture at the entrance of the museum.
Esto es un dibujo de nubes budistas que él ha usado también para elaborar una escultura que se encuentra en la entrada del museo.
And this is a paper study for the sculpture.
Un estudio en papel para la escultura.
Next. And this is the sculpture illuminated from behind that is at the entrance to the museum.
Y esta es la escultura iluminada desde atrás, por atrás, que está en la entrada del museo. Creo que es de cobre.
Next. I then started doing for the museum a series of prints based on tantric ideas which are derived from Buddhism. And here, the issue became how forms change in direct relationship to color change.
Es una serie de impresiones que ha hecho en base a las enseñanzas tántricas dentro del budismo y principalmente estas obras tienen que ver cómo cambia el color según la forma.
This also stimulated an interest in pattern making that I pursued for the next 6 or 7 years.
Sí, bueno, todo es trabajo que se ha hecho para este museo y esto inspiró una serie de trabajos sobre patrones que me inspiraron a trabajar unos 5 o 6 años en esto.
But I must say that during that period, I had no client or reason to be involved except curiosity and obsession.
Bueno, así hincapié que aquí no hubo un cliente que estaba por medio, era simplemente su propia motivación y obsesión sobre este trabajo.
These are some of the signs within the same vernacular that are outside the museum. They all have a kind of provocative literary idea as well as maintaining a similar style. Walls or doors.
Sí, bueno, una serie de quizás señaléticas que se encuentran en el museo que tienen una vocación provocativa, en este caso puertas, paredes son puertas.
And a poster for the Buddhist Film Festival, deriving from a famous form in Buddhist painting, which is called the Thousand Buddha painting.
Este es un cartel inspirado justo en una obra de los 1000 Budas, pero es para el Festival de Cine Budista.
And then more pattern and color making.
Más de estas inquietudes que va desarrollando sobre color y patrón.
Next. And look at the astonishing change in meaning by the introduction of a change in color. Of course, all of you have had the experience that I've had doing this, that color change produces astonishing emotional and formal change.
Bueno, dice que seguramente ustedes ya han experimentado esto también en este tipo de ejercicios, pero hace hincapié en el papel del cambio de color, la potencialidad que tiene eso emocionalmente.
And this is one of the rugs made in the bed in my house in New York.
Es una alfombra que él diseñó hecho en Tíbet, que está colocada en su departamento en Nueva York.
And this is a rug that was done for the theater for the School of Visual Arts.
Esto es una alfombra
They
que
came out that exercise.
es una alfombra que fue hecha para el teatro de la Escuela de Artes Visuales de Nueva York.
And this is one of the famous icons of modern art by Tatlin, Russian constructivist. It's a 15-foot study that everybody who starts investigating the history of modernism knows. And I was asked to design the theater on 23rd Street, Manhattan, by the School of Visual Arts. I thought as an icon, this would be a wonderful starting point to celebrate both the role of the school in contemporary art and the history of modernism in America. So using this as a reference, I began to think of it in terms of an icon for the school.
Fue comisionado para diseñar el teatro de la Escuela de Artes Visuales en la calle 23 y pensó que sería una gran inspiración el monumento a la Tercera Internacional de ruso.
And here are some drawings and preliminary studies for how to use that monument as a device to relate to the theater.
Son estudios preliminares de este elemento que va a adornar la fachada, la entrada principal del teatro.
And that very tentative sketch on the right turned out to be the basis for this design, which is the identity for the theater.
Esto terminó siendo la marca, digamos, la identidad para el teatro, que fue esa tentativa a la derecha, que es la que se escogió.
And here it is in reality, on top of the theater, those concentric rings turn and are illuminated at night and revolve every hour on the hour. And on the marquee itself, there is a quote about the nature of time, such as, today is the yesterday you were worried about tomorrow, or something like that.
Esta serie de líneas concéntricas giran muy en coordinación con el monumento original de Tatlin, que también tenía este movimiento cinético. Estas también tienen ese mismo propósito.
And at night you can see that the marquee is, and the object on top of it is even taller than the Empire State Building.
Dice que aquí le puede ver iluminado de noche y se puede dar cuenta que es más alto que el Empire State Building que está atrás.
And here is a sketch for the entire facade in its early stages.
Estudio preliminar para la fachada principal del teatro en sus etapas iniciales.
And a proposal that has not yet been implemented.
Y esto es una propuesta.
Because the City Planning Commission has not yet decided whether that mural is a work of art or a sign.
Okay. Esta es una propuesta que se ha sometido para aprobación, pero la Comisión de Arte de la Ciudad de Nueva York todavía no la aprueba porque no está seguro si es una obra de arte o es una valla publicitaria.
An early paper study of the interior of the theater, we discovered that there was 8-foot additional space once we tore out the ceiling of the old theater. And I decided to leave the concrete structure essentially as it was and just add some enamel metal elements to the sides and top of the theater. This is just a photograph of the interior with pieces of colored paper added to it, the first sketch I did. And what is interesting to see is how much this early, or this very first study, resembles what finally happened.
Al descubrir el tumbado del teatro antiguo, encontraron que había un espacio de unos 8 pies por encima y decidió aprovechar ese espacio, descubrirlo. Y aquí tenemos un estudio que es una especie de fotomontaje donde ha pegado ciertos paneles de color y dice que es inverosímil que este estudio ha llegado a ser en realidad lo que se propuso.
And this is for the theater as it now exists.
Actualmente como se ve en el teatro.
All the elements are made out of bent steel, enameled, and stenciled.
Todos los elementos son de acero esmaltado y puesto stencils.
What is amusing is to see how close the finished interior is to the original study with pieces of cut paper.
Nuevamente hace hincapié en la semejanza entre el estudio del fotomontaje y lo que se hizo finalmente.
And here are some just paper studies with little patterns on them to anticipate what the effect would be.
Son estudios en papel con patrones para un poco anticipar cuál sería el efecto una vez instalado.
And as you can see, all of this derives from those original studies that were done for no particular purpose, but the purpose will find you. Next. Next.
Gee, you might want to say that.
It's an actual study on metal, spray paint, where the metaphor is for the dots to represent light. And you also see real light reflecting off the symbolic light. Thanks.
Son patrones, los puntos representan la luz y a la vez reflejan la luz verdadera del sol ambiental afuera.
And this is the bar. I was there, looks fantastic. It's now 6 years old and it looks as though it was installed yesterday. There's something about steel and enamel which really makes it impervious to everything. That's a gold leaf lighting fixture. And the game here is to show the symbolic light, which are those yellow dots against the green, reflecting real light, which is the light that is coming from that gold leaf lighting fixture, and the play between symbolic light and real light is the artistic game that's being played in this bar.
Sí, a nivel conceptual, concepto artístico, es los puntos que representan la luz simbólica versus la luz que está siendo emanada por la fixtura horizontal, que es un difusor que está hecho en pan de oro. Entonces el juego es entre la luz reflejada sobre los puntos y el pan de oro.
And going back to questions of dark and light. This is a design in its dark mode for a rug.
Es un estudio de luz y sombra nuevamente.
Next. And in a light mode for the same rug. But the emotional content is enormously different.
Sí, nuevamente el componente emocional a cambiar los tonos de color que provocan los cambios.
Next. Light.
Luz,
Dark.
sombra.
This says, looking is not seeing.
Ver no es percibir.
I gave a copy of this to my ophthalmologist and it is now hanging in his waiting room.
Le dado una copia a su oftalmólogo y está en su sala de recepción.
Thanks. It's very interesting to make things where you realize how much of what you see is formed in the brain. You see those 6 dark spots? Those are all illusions. They don't exist.
Nuevamente el juego perceptual que hace hincapié en cómo vemos y que no vemos, a veces los puntos oscuros realmente no existen.
Next. I use that background as a basis to make this poster because now I find I'm more and more using these patterns that I made as a kind of scrap pile of material that I use as the way you would use paper fragments, as though you were doing a collage.
Hace aquí énfasis en el hecho de usar estos fragmentos de papeles, de diseños anteriores, como una especie de collage de reutilización o reuso de sus imágenes.
Here's something interesting that happens. This is just a yellow line of slightly wavering thickness. But by putting that down on a surface, you create a wavy background. You see the background of waves that occurs behind the yellow line. All of that is an illusion. It doesn't exist. It happens only because the yellow line varies in width. It's all made in your brain.
La aplicación técnica de la línea amarilla que va variando en espesor genera una ilusión óptica y nuevamente hace hincapié en que lo que vemos no es necesariamente la realidad o la verdad. Todo está en el cerebro. Este efecto de oleaje que percibimos ahora.
But I found one of those backgrounds perfect for this poster for the School of Visual Arts, The Secret of Art.
Encontró que ese fondo, ese patronaje, fue perfecto para esta idea que era para una exposición en la Escuela de Artes Visuales, El Secreto del Arte.
I have another client called the Theater for New Audiences, and during the course of my work for them over the last 10 years, I did many portraits of Shakespeare. And I thought it would be amusing to combine two unrelated things. In this case, rugs and Shakespeare. And very often, what one finds in the history of art is the combination of things that don't go to one another, brought into a relationship.
Está comentando el asunto de que a veces cosas no tienen relación en el arte. En este caso son retratos de Shakespeare, variopintos, pero que son hechas alfombras.
So here are some Shakespeare heads. Let me show examples of what I mean. Next.
Nos va a enseñar los ejemplos de
This is how Shakespeare is going to appear on the theater that's just been designed.
la fachada de un teatro. Entonces tenemos un retrato de Shakespeare.
That portrait will change.
Ese retrato cambiará.
But here's an example of things brought together that you're familiar with, because we do this as designers all the time. Here's an alphabet I designed maybe 25 years ago, and I used the 4, the number 4, as one piece of the design.
Es una tipografía que diseñó hace unos 20 años y se basó mucho en el número 4. Como pueden ver,
And then I combined it with a pattern
y lo combinó como un patrón
to make a new element, a pattern form. That is something we do all the time as designers, because so much of our work is essentially collage assemblies of random elements.
Sí, mucho de la dinámica de ser diseñadores que tomamos estos contextos diferentes y los intercambiamos a modo de collage. Entonces el número 4 diseñado tipográficamente ha sido aplicado un patrón y es algo completamente diferente.
So here's an example how we can combine rugs and Shakespeare.
Un ejemplo
Here's
de
Shakespeare.
cómo combinamos Shakespeare y alfombras.
Here's a pattern.
Un patrón.
Here's Shakespeare in a pattern. This is perhaps the most obvious way. We literally are making a mat out of the pattern and framing Shakespeare. But perhaps more subtly, we can do it this way. Let's go on. Shakespeare. Pattern.
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare pattern.
Patrón y Shakespeare.
Shakespeare. Pattern.
¿No?
Shakespeare and pattern.
Patrón y Shakespeare.
Shakespeare. Pattern. Shakespeare and pattern. So we see how the combination of seemingly unrelated or incompatible ideas leads to another form. In fact, it's kind of a standard mechanism for changing the appearance of things and inventing new ways of expressing ideas that at first seem not compatible and then seem obviously compatible. The next series of things are things that I did to present to a client that were not acceptable for whatever reason, because they either transgressed too much from the client's expectation or were seen as not appropriate.
Excuse me, can you see that? Brother, pause so you can translate that.
Bueno, terminó diciendo que podemos ver cómo la combinación de elementos incongruentes pueden generar nuevas ideas, ¿no? Como una metodología de creación artística. Y ahora nos va a comentar sobre una nueva serie aquí que tiene como título El cliente no lo entendió.
And these were typographical ads for Coney Island. I won't go into what Coney Island was or what it is, it may be too complicated. But these were only based on sound. The client thought they were not decorative enough. Only Coney, Coney, only Coney, the one and only, etc. I think you'd have to have a little more knowledge of the language to appreciate them, but the client didn't appreciate them either. So let's go on.
Sounds like a mantra.
Here's a logo for the Templeton Prize. Client didn't like it. And two bands.
Templeton Prize.
Too bad for an ideological company that wanted to present their work of New York's most desirable couples for a beer company. We worked for Brooklyn Beer, and we discovered that it was illegal to show beer with any food product. And on the right is something I truly believe in, which is that if you look at the painting for 20 seconds, you close your eyes, you relax, you are no longer the same person. My belief is that art is transformative, that in the presence of art, you are changed. I couldn't convince the museum of that, however, or at least not to run bus shelters saying that.
Bueno, acá a la izquierda es un diseño, un anuncio para una empresa de cervezas en Brooklyn, pero luego descubrieron que era ilegal poner cerveza al lado de comida, entonces fue descartado. Y a la derecha, claro, el famoso cuadro del beso de Clint, y el señor Glaser hace la observación de que el arte es transformativo, en el sentido que si miramos el cuadro y cerramos los ojos por unos 20 segundos, nos relajamos y luego lo miramos de nuevo, ya no somos la misma persona. Pero no puedo convencerle al museo de esto.
And just a few political things. This is a variation of the Republican identity. We call them the Republicans.
Es la identidad alternativa del Partido Republicano. Republicans. No pueden los republicanos, literalmente.
And this is a proposed entry to the Brooklyn Brewery.
Es la propuesta de la entrada al esta cervecería de Brooklyn.
And two dark prints,
Dos impresos oscuros,
a series of dark prints actually.
una serie
And the
de...
question here is always whether the darkness provokes interest and makes you pay attention, or whether the difficulty provokes boredom and indifference. And that's an essential question for all of us interested in communication.
Sí, el uso de lo oscuro si provoca mayor interés o simplemente aburrimiento. Es una pregunta de comunicación visual.
But this would be that's all. Yeah. And I think that's it in terms of our little slideshow.
Eso es en cuanto ya a la muestra de diapositivas.
So if you have one or two questions, I will try to answer them.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for the slideshow. Very interesting. Háganos preguntas si queremos hacer algunas preguntas al señor Glaser.
Sí, sí.
Sí, por favor.
Hello, Milton. Thank you very much for the wonderful conference. My name is Christopher Scott, so the question I would like to ask you is that when people think of the name Milton Glaser, people all around the world instantly think of I heart NY or I love NY. Do you think that is a good thing or a bad thing? Because I know a lot of your work, like the likes of the Bob Dylan poster, the organised poster, and many more. So what do you think about that?
Right, hold on, let's give my brother a chance to interpret that question for the audience.
Bueno, se está haciendo la pregunta sobre sus trabajos que ha hecho, que ya son famosos como el afiche de Bob Dylan, el Yo amo Nueva York, etcétera, etcétera. ¿Está preguntando?
Sí, what does he think of the people around the world just recognizing his work as I heart NY?
¿Y qué opina él sobre la apreciación del público en general sobre este trabajo?
I never know how to answer a question like that. What do I think of people who think about, because I love New York and Bob Dylan. What is there an answer to that question? Oh, I like those people. I don't like those people. I think those people should go have a glass of beer.
The reason
What people think. I'm sorry I lived so long because most people know my work from the first 20 years. I've been doing this stuff for about 60 years, which is much too long for anybody to do this much work. And I have to say that I'm also more interested in the work that I've done over the last 5 years than the work that I did in my first 25. So the fact that my work has become known for its earliest manifestation is just an inevitable consequence of history. The fact that people know I love New York more than anything else I've ever done is a freakish event. I mean, what happened to that one iconic, I did that in 1977, and the fact that it has been seen by more people than anyone could imagine is incomprehensible. Why? I don't know. I mean, why is it in every country in the world? I don't know. The fact that it is banal and a kind of thing that probably 10,000 other graphic designers could have done, it's a great mystery to me. The fact that people don't know everything I've done, well, how could it be otherwise? Why should anybody know what I've done? So I don't know how to answer that question. That people don't know what it is you've done unless they happen to be particularly interested in what you've done. And what you've seen today are basically things that I've done more recently that I personally am more interested in.
Bueno, dice que no sabe cómo contestar esa pregunta, básicamente. Claro, para él es una cosa que es demasiado inconmensurable, supongo. Porque yo supongo que ya es algo más allá del ámbito personal creativo de él. Eso ya es propiedad, es dominio público que está en todo el mundo y la gente reacciona y lo toma como quiere, ¿no? Pero que él está más interesado, él ha estado en estos 60 años y esos son trabajos que hizo hace algún tiempo, ya 30 años atrás, pero que está mucho más interesado en lo que está haciendo recientemente y este trabajo que nos ha enseñado últimamente es lo que más le preocupa y le entusiasma.
Just one more thing. I would just like to explain why I asked that question, Milton. The reason why is because 5 years ago I created probably what people consider my most famous poster. Is a poster called Dead Leaf. And I've done many posters from that time. And yet people always come back to me and they say, Christopher Scott, Dead Leaf. And for me, as a graphic designer, for me that's quite frustrating. But it's also good that people recognize the poster, so it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing for me.
Hace la pregunta o explica por qué hizo esa pregunta a Milton Glaser, porque por su propia experiencia como diseñador también le reconocen por un trabajo que se llama Dead Leaf y que es una especie de arma de doble filo, porque es bueno que le conocen por esa obra, pero también es medio frustrante que le conocen solo por esa obra.
So that's nice. Thank you very much, Milton.
¿Alguien más tiene una pregunta? Bob, you have a question? ¿Puede decirme a question? Sí, sí. What's your name, please? ¿Tu nombre?
Milton, Chitty here has a question for you.
¿Qué lo llevó a Milton Glaser a ir al lado hindú y orientarse por ese lado? ¿Cuál fue el motivo de él para ir hacia ese lado?
Chitty's question is what motivated you to go in this whole Hindu thing? Why did you go in that direction in your life? Actually, it's Buddhist, really.
Someone said the mind is a very poor instrument for examining the self. Who knows why you do anything in your life? Why did I marry the woman I married? Why did I move uptown or downtown? Or I don't know why I did anything. I mean, the reason, the why of anything that you did is forever buried in the neurological paths of your brain, and don't ever expect to understand any of it. Understanding or attempting to understand that is a delusion. So, excuse me for not having the answer to that question, but I never will have the answer to that question.
We understand, Mr. Glaser. Dice que él tampoco puede contestar esa pregunta porque la mente es un pobre instrumento para entender las razones o maquinaciones de uno. ¿Por qué se casó con su esposa? ¿Por qué vive donde vive? Dice que eso está impregnado íntricamente en sus corredores neurológicos y que nunca sabrá por qué hace eso. O ninguno de nosotros sabemos por qué hacemos lo que hacemos.
¿Tienes pregunta, Darius? ¿Una recomendación
guess we're wrapping it up here, Milton. There's a question that maybe you could give us, I don't know, maybe some fatherly advice, I don't know, with respect as to being a graphic designer or an artist today.
You want a generic response to being a graphic designer today?
Advice for students.
Well, maybe your personal view, more than generic.
Well, my personal view is that you do have a role to play in society, that you actually are not necessarily merely in the role of selling goods to others or persuading them to buy things, that you have a social goal, that you should do no harm, and that you should think of yourself in a position where you have a public role to make things better than they were before you appeared. And that's enough.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Glaser. Nos dice que nosotros tenemos que entender que tenemos un rol que jugar en el mundo, que tenemos una responsabilidad social, que no es solo un asunto de vender cosas a la gente o apoyar en esa gestión, que es importante también dejar el mundo mejor de lo que lo encontraste, como llegaste, y que no tengan miedo de hacer lo que tienen que hacer.
Okay. All right, so, one with the students approaching. Por favor, sigue. ¿Cómo te llamas? Ya, por favor, dirige a Alicia.
One more question. Melissa. Melissa has a question.
Ya, por favor, que...
Melissa, para que escuche en español.
Que si tiene que ver algo el racismo para que él no ponga el color en la cara de algunos diseños. Ajá, por ejemplo, en el de Barbie, él no pone color en la cara.
Let me see if I can translate this without screwing it up. Melissa says, is there a reason, maybe a racial reason, for why you don't apply color to some of the faces, or why there is a lot of color, I would suppose, involved? There's no preferential racial tone, let's say. It's a hairy question.
Not is. I would say that the issues are more aesthetic than sociological. No, I think it's all, as most of the work is, it's all about appearance. And my thought about applying color to faces is probably exactly the same as applying color to rugs. And the fact that they are, I don't even know what color in the faces is. It's more to do with the surface I'm working on than any intention about what the faces should be.
Okay, I'll buy that. El señor Glaser nos dice que realmente es más una pregunta sociológica que estética, que realmente no sabe por qué aplica estos colores a las caras, es un asunto estético. Es como aplicar color a los rostros, lo mismo que aplicar color a las alfombras.
Okay, now I'm going to butt in here with a question of my own, Mr. Glaser.
Yeah.
How do you feel the internet and digital technology has changed graphic design? ¿Cómo piensas que como el internet y tecnología digital ha cambiado diseño gráfico?
These are the kind of questions that are so imponderable because we don't understand the consequences of any act. We sent out a Facebook piece the other day, and it hit 50,000 over a day or two. And we realized that we had an instrument as graphic designers to reach people. I'm so ignorant of this process that we hadn't even thought about. I know it's changed graphic design because it's changed the way the brain works. And the only thing that matters is the way the brain works. So, but it is so complex, and the consequences are so enormously interwoven with everything else, with language, with behavior, with eating patterns, that it is impossible to separate it out in discrete pieces as though there was a direct relationship. The consequences are so pervasive and so indirect that any attempt at this kind of superficial analysis that you hear about the consequences are bound to be wrong. So I'm not going to embarrass you by giving you a banal and superficial analysis that will without doubt be wrong. So I will say honestly, I haven't got the vaguest idea.
Okay, we respect that, Mr. Glaser. Dice que esto, el efecto de las nuevas tecnologías electrónicas en cuanto al diseño gráfico, es un imponderable porque la situación es tan compleja. Es muy difícil, porque es tan interrelacionado todo, el lenguaje, lo visual, la tecnología, todo mismo es tan complejo que es difícil desglosar eso en entidades muy discretas y que él no quisiera intentar responder algo que realmente sería solo una aproximación superficial y por ende no estaría acertada como respuesta. We have another question, Mr. Glaser.
Okay.
¿Tu nombre? David.
Que hablen en el micrófono en voz alta.
Yo quería saber qué opina sobre el diseño en Latinoamérica y si tiene algún referente latino.
David asks, what do you think of Latin American design and if you have any particular preferences in mind?
I don't know enough about it. I don't even know what's going on down the street. I mean, I have no idea what people are doing. I don't know what's going on in design. I don't know what's hot. I don't know what people are thinking.